Peter, I know you have a very different take on the economy from the rest of this panel. I want to broach the subject by first making a plug for my organization. This is the cover of the New Atlantic. It says The Hero, and the hero on the cover is Ben Bernanke. Peter, in the green room, just outside there, you told me, and I believe this was on the record, it is now.
My criticism of the Fed is always on the record.
I think I got sign off. If it was my contractual obligation to do everything possible to wreck this economy, what I would do is go back and follow every single thing that Ben Bernanke, the hero, the Atlantic on book stands, did in the last 3 years. Explain that.
Sure. You know, first of all, you mentioned that you think the government needs to protect investors. Investors need protection from government. They need protection from people like Ben Bernanke. I mean, he is the greatest threat to American investors. He's got interest rates artificially low, which is robbing savers of their return. He's destroying the value of our currency, the dollar. And the government is forcing Americans to participate in the world's biggest Ponzi scheme. I mean, so we need to be protected from government, not the other way around. But the reason that I'm criticizing Ben Bernanke is, you know, rather than learning from the mistakes of his predecessor, Alan Greenspan, he's just repeating them on a bigger scale. Greenspan's policies created the housing bubble. Yes, Fannie and Freddie, government-created entities, were part of the problem. But take the Fed out of the picture, take those artificially low interest rates, that 1% Fed funds rate that we had for years, we never would have inflated this bubble. We never would have had subprime. We never would have had teaser rates on adjustable rate mortgages. All this was a creation of the Fed. And the Fed made these mistakes to try to artificially stimulate the economy from the recession we had in 2001. And when Greenspan's bubble burst in 2008, and we had that financial crisis, which was clearly a creation of government, what did Ben Bernanke do? Did he learn from the mistakes? No. Not only did he not raise interest rates to 1%, he brought them to 0. Even people that didn't see the financial crisis coming, and this conference is full of economists who missed it, right? Even some of those will say that part of the problem was that the Fed kept interest rates for too low for too long. Well, what is Bernanke doing? Keeping them at 0 even longer? And they just announced these phony stress tests that came out there in the papers today. The Federal Reserve asked the banks to run these stress tests. Well, under the stress tests, the assumption is that interest rates stay at 0 and that the 10-year Treasury yield stays below 2%. Now, why didn't the Fed ask the banks to run a stress test on a return to normal interest rates? The reason is because all those banks would fail. Ben Bernanke has got the whole economy hooked now on cheap credit, and it's masquerading as economic growth. If you look at the trade deficit that came out last week, it's exploding. The current account deficit is getting bigger. The jobs that we're creating now are making us poorer, not richer. What we need for economic growth is savings, is investment, and production. We're not getting that. All we're doing is spending borrowed money. And yeah, when you spend borrowed money, you can temporarily create some jobs, like we created some jobs during the housing bubble. But when that bubble bursts, all those jobs disappear, and what you're left with is a gigantic hole, which is what we're digging for ourselves right now. So this panel is about growth. We don't have any growth, right? Our economy is actually getting sicker because Ben Bernanke refuses to allow the cure. What we need is higher interest rates. The biggest problem in this country is that rates are too low. The federal government has price-fixed interest rates. It's not letting the market determine interest rates. So because interest rates are too low, Americans spend too much, they consume too much, they don't save enough, they don't invest enough, and the government is enormous. If you want to know why the budget deficits are so big, it's because of Ben Bernanke. If he did his job, right, if he let interest rates go up and refused to monetize government debt, Congress would have no choice but to cut spending. But because Ben Bernanke gives them a way out, he gives them an easy way out because he buys all that paper, the government gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But, you know, these same mistakes took place in Europe. I mean, we're looking at what's happening in Greece right now. A few years ago, Greece had very, very low interest rates, almost as low as ours. And then they went up because Greece's creditors got worried that they weren't going to get paid back. Well, we can't pay our creditors